So my name is Matthew Chang. I'm a professional engineer. I work for Weitz, and I've spent most of my career doing factory automation. So I think a lot of people in this room have that in common. Quick bio on Weitz. It was founded in 1855 by Charles H. Weitz in Des Moines, Iowa. So we've heard a lot from different people here that have 100-year-old companies, and Weitz is 160 years old now. It came from humble beginnings as a carpentry shop for window installation in hotels. So the first hotels in Des Moines had Weitz windows in them. We're going to start off with some definitions here. So I've tried to take a very technical definition on both. Engineering is the application of scientific by which the properties of matter and the sources of energy in nature are made useful to people. Finance is the system that includes the circulation of money, the granting of credit, the making of investments, and the provision of banking facilities. So both finance and engineering are heavy math-based sciences. They're very different in their function and what they seek to do with that. So what we're going to talk about in this theater is engineering and finance is really making sure that you're understanding finance when you design your next engineering project. And you'll have a lot better chance of success going that way. I think if we compare in all of our companies the chief engineer and what their salary is to the chief finance officer and what their salary is, we'll probably have some insights as to who rules the roost. Okay, so 5 years after Charles Weitz started his carpentry shop in Des Moines, Iowa, there was one of the best capital projects that I think I've ever read about, which was the Pony Express. It was an example of operational excellence. The Pony Express was opened for business in 1860. The innovation of the day, or the operational efficiency, was 10-day delivery from a Kansas City suburb to Sacramento, California. So at the time, that was unheard of. In fact, the first test run they did, they delivered letters in secret, and people thought the postmarks on the letters were a forgery. So there's no way these could have been delivered in 10 days. And how did they do it? They did it very similar to how we approach our food engineering projects in our different factories. They started with the people, so they had to hire 120 riders. These were riders of high endurance and extraordinary skill. They had 184 waypoints. So from Kansas City onward to Sacramento, there was 184 stations in their space, approximately 10 miles apart. And the reason they were spaced 10 miles apart is that the ponies could ride at full speed, at full gallop, for 10 miles. And that one rider would get off with his 2-pound knapsack, he would get on another pony at the next waypoint, he'd ride for 10 more miles at full gallop. And onward they would go, cycling through ponies and riders until they could make it 10 days. Now they had their share of adversity. So they had inclement weather. You can imagine trying to deliver through all 4 seasons, what it was like, delivering mail on horseback. They were subject to attacks. They had a lot of hostile territory and really no rule of law in between Kansas City and California. And then they had very difficult terrain. So here we can see a map of the route and also all the waypoints. And you'll notice here that over the Rocky Mountains, the waypoints get real tight. You know, that was kind of the bottleneck of the system, if you will. So why did I take you back to 1860 and a story about an old carpentry shop in 1855? Well, really it's to talk about market disruption. So 18 months after the Pony Express opened for business, it closed down. And why did it close down? Because information could be transferred from the East Coast to the West Coast instantaneously with the telegraph. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are our projects set up for success, or is the next innovation or market disruption going to shut down our new business idea before it ever gets a chance to pay back to the business in terms of ROI? I don't know the numbers on the Pony Express, but I would venture to guess that the business case was stressed when the telegraph came out. So the 4 topics we're going to cover here are, we're going to talk about driving ROI with proper site selection. We're going to talk about driving ROI with good cash flow. We're going to talk about modular construction. When I use the term construction, I mean building, equipment, infrastructure, IT. And then we're going to talk about third-party utilities. But before we do that, we're going to start with the 3 laws of capital projects. And so just like the laws of physics, Gravity is constant. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Can anybody, and you can just shout it out, can anybody name for me any of the laws of capital projects?
Price goes up.
Price goes up. That sounds like a good one. Anybody else?
Take longer than you think.
I think you're on the right track. It is. The project is in the wrong place. It's the wrong project to begin with. And it costs too much. So it doesn't matter what we do, how well we design it. When we're done, somebody somewhere will say those things about our project. And they always have the benefit of hindsight. They have the benefit of understanding market changes. And so we have to be smart enough to anticipate what's ahead. So we'll start with site selection. The first tip and trick to boosting your ROI is to start your project with a good understanding of what geodata applies to the location that you're trying to find. The next one is understanding your logistics network. What's coming inbound, what's going outbound. Am I B2B right now? Will I eventually be B2C? How does e-commerce factor into this? Does it? How do my changing demand analytics change this? And am I being demand driven? Did I understand where all my product was going and where all my raw materials were coming from today and my forecast for the future? So the first thing we have to do with site selection is we have to allow ourselves to be data driven. In a lot of organizations, site selection is done by real estate, engineering is done by engineering. So it's the hypothesis of this theater that those two need to coexist. That the engineers that are so good with driving data into systems also need to drive data into real estate criteria. So let's take a quick look at what this might look like. So we're evaluating 2 facility sites on this map. And for the sake of the presentation, we try not to overlay load the data, but for the sake of any presentation to any executive or to any stakeholders in your company, you have to keep it simple. And we have the question mark that this is a transportation sensitive facility, and we don't want to be in a situation where we are in a neighborhood, in a suburb. And so the 2 sites that we look at, we overlay heat map, we overlay population density. We find that if we go visit these facilities today, we're on the edge of the population, and we're probably okay. But with the growth of populations, where do we think we'll be in 10 years? And so we have to use that information available to us to smartly place today our facility with information that we won't know until 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And we hope that we're still in the right place. The next piece that we talk about as far as driving good ROI into a project is having a modular construction plan. So earlier today we heard the panel talk about mirror images. We heard them talk about flipping plants, flipping warehouses. Do you have enough property for expansion? So the first thing that we're going to advocate here for is mirror image master plans. And this is actually where, as an engineering leader, you have to start being brave. Because the first thing your organization is going to do is say, hey, you need a little bit less land. Let's lay out a little bit less capital cost for land. And there's ways to deal with that. There's ways with properties and options and whatnot. But the first thing we have to be concerned about is if we're going to be going through the capital costs of building buildings, installing equipment, and then putting in systems for new products, we practice lean principles in our plants right now. But do we practice that on the engineering side? Are we doing just-in-time construction, just-in-time delivery? So I believe that with modern construction techniques, that there's no reason that we need to go build out extra square footage today, because all that extra building does is load up a capital project and make the IRR or the ROI, whatever our metric is, makes it seem very unattractive. If we want to have a really attractive project from a finance perspective, we're going to build only what we need. And we're also going to take that smaller, right-sized footprint, and we're going to have a utility and process master plan that goes with that, so that we have just the right amount of stuff that we need today from a process, utility, and systems point of view. But it's expandable for when we decide to grow our facility. And it adapt to what the next process and increase is to the factory. So here we can see what a piece of property looks like if we build just what we need. And if we've been smart, we can add on a major plant expansion, more capacity, more warehouse, what have you, with very little disruption to ongoing operations. There's a quick recap. Okay, delaying the cash flow. This is probably the most controversial topic. So we'll take a quick second to interview the audience again. Who in here is a food manufacturer, food or beverage manufacturer, that is using 30-day or greater than 30-day payment terms? We have one brave person that was willing to admit it. And I saw a couple hands go down, and we said beyond 30. Now, who in here is a service provider that supplies engineering services, plant equipment, that is currently having terms of greater than 30-day pay dictated to them? Okay, so we have some liars on the production side. I think every service provider said, hey, somebody's hurting my cash flow. I still got to make payroll, but I don't get paid for 60 days or 75 days. So let's first consider the point of view of the producer. Procter & Gamble implemented 75-day pay across their supply chain. All vendors, suppliers, contractors, engineers across the supply chain in 2012. Probably a lot of folks in here have been part of that and have a piece of their mind to some procurement official somewhere of what they think about it. And I see some heads nodding. And one of the interesting things was that the CFO of Procter & Gamble in 2013 made the observation that our cash balances have grown by $1 billion worldwide. So by stressing all of our vendors across the world and saying, hey, we're going to pay in 75 days, they had $1 billion more in cash. That was cash in the bank account, and that was also cash on the balance sheet. So from Procter & Gamble's decision, was it a good idea to delay the cash flow? And I think with those type of results, it's hard to argue. It just hurts if you're the guy getting somebody. So we're going to look real quick at what a potential capital project looks like. Now this is actually a real capital project. We've updated the timeline, and then we took off the names to protect the innocent. But what we have here is we have a series of cash outflows. We have land, expense, building, equipment, and then down below we have a amount of cash inflows. This is the new revenue streams being brought to the business by bringing up a warehouse, bringing up a production line, and what have you. So on the surface as engineers, we look at the two figures and we say cash inflow, which is good, of 19 million, cash outflow of 12.5. It's a 50% return on investment. 50% return on investment. That's great. We should pat ourselves on the back. Well, what we have to remember with finance is that finance is the study of money over time and with applied interest rates. So it's not exactly what it seems to be on the surface. If I offered you $1 today or $1 in 7 years, which one would you take? And say, give me the $1 today. Okay? Conversely, if your employer said, hey, we're going to pay you $100,000 for your new role, and you have the option to take that payment in weekly installments throughout the year, or one lump sum payment of $100,000 at the end of the year, you would say, give it to me every week. That's way better for me than having to wait all year to get my paycheck. So kind of in our personal lives, we understand the basics of finance. And then we put our engineering hats and we come to work and we start to forget some of that. So what we can see here is that this, if we just look at the end results of the 12 million out and the 19 million in, it has a dismal performance of a 4% internal rate of return. And why is that? It's because tomorrow's potential cash inflow is not nearly as important to the finance office as today's expensive cash outflow for the capital project. If you're on the service provider side or the new project side, that's a cash outflow for the business. That can be certain as soon as they sign the contract. That cash coming in is not as certain, and it's not as important because that's down the road. So let's take a look at a different way to do this. We keep the same figures, we keep the same timeline, and then we carry the cost of delaying the cash flow in the project. So we add that 12.5 million goes to 14 million. What happens to the figures? Well, something powerful happens by not stressing the business and not subjecting the project to all the hurdle rates and the cost of carrying the cash. We get to a much more attractive 26% return on investment. So as service providers, we feel great. Hey, we came up with an idea that was 26% return on investment for the business. That's a less than 4-year payback. Hurrah. Well, it needs to be less than a 4-year payback. And why is that? It's because according to Acosta Marketing, which is the country's leading food marketer, only 15% of new products survive 2 years in the grocery store. This morning, when we saw General Mills giving a presentation, they talked about SKU proliferation, going from 10,000 SKUs to 35,000 SKUs. And in that that growth to 35,000, it's a bloodbath. Not very much sticks, you know? And of the new SKUs that make it past 2 years, only 40% of those survive a decade. So if you come up with a new product, it's got to be really innovative or really sticky or really grab consumer trends to work. And on the engineering side, we have to understand that some of our factories, some of our plants, some of our equipment will be outdated before it's even commissioned. And so we have to design projects that have much more attractive ROI in order to support the industry. Okay, so we're kind of moving up the value chain here of how to boost your ROI. So put the project in the right place, right? We talked about that. And then the next thing we said was that build just what you need. Take a lean concept. You know, the folks at Chobani, I hope they're not in the room right now, but they said, hey, we should have built more. Well, most people don't have that problem, right? Let's just be candid. Very few people are dealing with the type of product line growth that Chobani is. So I think what most producers need to do is they need to build just what they need to prove the business case. Just what they need to get capacity online and nothing else. And then the next thing we talked about was use cash flow, use finance, and use hurdle rates to your favor in a project. Well, each one of those is going to incrementally increase the ROI. The final thing you can do is you can look at your utility systems. If we've ever seen a full CapEx for a new project or major expansion, usually about 20% or more of the CapEx is in utility systems. Well, what utilities are we used to paying for? We pay for sewer, we pay for water, we pay for electrical. Well, when it comes to compressed air, it's free, subsidized by the plant. Everybody gets free compressed air. Everybody gets free chilled water, right? So I think one of the things we have to start doing is being a little more frugal in our approach to utility usage. And we need to say, what can I get out of my CapEx? What can I get a third party to come own and operate for me? That reduces my maintenance staff, and that also gets folks, you know, back to my core competency of making my products and not in changing filters or being chemical measuring folks. So we want to use utility systems to our advantage. We want to, if we can, get a third party to own and operate them, get them out of the CapEx. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to have good metering. We want to start tolling our business units for their use of those. That way we actually know what the true cost of the products are. We know what a production run really costs. We don't just have a plant with this large overhead bubble on top of it. And then really lean looking production costs. So you got all these lean production lines and products and SKUs, and then you've got this overhead burden on the plant. We don't know how to get it assigned to the different products. So I think we can do that here with being smart in both how we toll the businesses and then also trying to get someone else to own and operate, get that 20% off the top of the CapEx and just see what happens to the return on investment. And then also see what happens to the efficiency. So one of the interesting things is if we get someone else to buy and build the utility systems in our plant, they're going to put in more state-of-the-art systems. Before it was a CapEx constraint. Do we really go with the extra features or not? Someone else does it and they're on the hook. They're going to want to put in better systems. That's better for electrical usage. It's more sustainable. It's going to drive down your kilowatt hours at the plant. And then it's also going to increase your flexibility as you have more options on the equipment, what you can do with it, and how it's controlled. Okay, so wrapping this up, we want to remember that finance holds the keys to our next project. As the greatest design ever designed that was never built is really not a project, right? It was just a great idea that never happened. So when we design our projects, we have to do so remembering that our ultimate customer is finance, and that the CFO has to like that project every bit as much as us engineers like that project. And with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
How much does the fact that the time value of money today has gone almost to zero affect this presentation?
So this is all with live data. This is all with live data, and before I showed those numbers on the CapEx video I had, 2 manufacturing CFOs review it, just to make sure that I was doing my Excel properly. And here's the short answer, is outside money is cheap. Inside money is near and dear. We have a food producer sitting in the front row here. The internal hurdle rates at these companies and their cost of capital is usually over 10%. Right, so 10% might be cheap, but we'll have some companies that are represented here that are up to the 15% range. So even though it's cheap out on the street, it's not cheap to the investor that bought stock in that company and then is using, the company is using his capital to reinvest. That investor expects 10 to 15% on his money. I don't mean to be gender specific there. The answer? Yes.
I made a statement that food producers now should be looking for opportunities to reduce costs, don't change filters, focus on more competency, et cetera. As a provider in that space, I'm not seeing all the food manufacturers going in that direction. Can you comment on what you see as far as what's trending with respect to their appetite for outsourcing facilities?
So that's where I talked about being brave. You know, there's in some of the more established food companies, and I don't know this to be true about General Mills, but I'll pick on them because they gave a great keynote speech this morning. They really like to own and operate everything. They want to own all their assets. They want to be in total control of their destination. That's super capital intensive and it's very personnel intensive. So if you can just think of the maintenance staff you have to have to maintain some of their large operations with all the different heat processes and utility processes and whatnot. So it takes a culture shift. It has to be driven from leadership. But I think when you can approach these large food companies with ideas that show them what the return is and how it's more attractive to their plant environment, then you'll see them start to get on board. The easiest way to do it is with a test scenario. So there's one food manufacturer here that I won't name by name that is currently doing that, and they said, hey, what if we got out of the wastewater treatment business? You know, and that's kind of one that we can all conceptualize. A lot of food factories did not have wastewater treatment plants initially. And then with the tightening of regulations, and then the local municipalities being a little bit upset with the very off-characteristic wastewater coming out of, they have started to say, hey, either I'm going to fine you or you're going to get in compliance, right? And so that's driven a lot of pre-treatment plants. And almost every major food production facility has a wastewater pre-treatment plant. And so you think of what that does to the plant manager that shows up, and now he's got to be a chemist to understand the reports he's getting from his wastewater people, and it's really not high volume. If you can get that at a reasonable price outsourced to somebody that was looking for a 7-year return on their capital instead of maybe the 3 to 4 year that the food producer's looking for, it's kind of a no-brainer. So I think it's one of those things that this is early in the industry. There are companies that are specializing in capitalizing those assets, owning and operating, and that with each company, they just need to prove it themselves first. They have to go out there, do a test case, and see does it work. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.